When the credits start rolling, but the movie keeps haunting you.
Before, after.
Then it's time to tune in to Dismembering Horror. We'll talk about what worked and also what didn't. We'll dissect every aspect. Maybe some of we shouldn't.
He turned out to be a completely unreliable asshole.
Take it away, boys.
And thank you, ethereal woman. Indeed. Welcome, everyone, to Dismembering Horror. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Ryan.
And yeah, as I just said, hello, everyone, chugging along here. I think Tim and I had been getting up to our necks in new release films, so felt like swinging the pendulum in another direction with a oft-recommended older film from 1945, a horror anthology, Dead of Night.
Is this the first horror anthology ever? Because it kind of feels like it.
No, I did my research. It's not.
Damn.
And nor is it the first horror anthology for us. Do you want to try naming the 5 that we've done, Tim, or should I just list them off?
5? Oh my God.
I'm just going to list them off.
No, I got this. Asylum.
Ding!
That's the only one I can think of.
All right. Then Ghost Stories, another British
that
one.
one's good.
Qui-Gon.
Okay, yeah.
Black Sabbath.
Right.
And Horror Stories from South Korea.
Wow.
And now today, Dead of Night. As I said, from 45. Cool. Or since this is a British film, they kept referring to it as in the special features for this film and everything. All the British men talking about it. They weren't using the word anthology film. They'd call it a portmanteau.
Wow.
Or portmanteau. Portmanteau, I think is how it's said or spelled.
That's
anyway.
pretty exciting. Using other languages to describe things.
Yeah.
It makes you sound more professional.
Yeah, or British at least.
Yep.
Cool. Well, we like to start off here, as we do, with a trailer to further dive into our film. Unless there's anything else. You ready for that, Tim?
No, although I will say, of our horror anthologies, this is certainly one of them.
Okay. It is. I'm not sure what you mean by that. We'll find out soon enough after our trailer here. So here we go. All right. Not whatever you're listening to this, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, here we go into Dead of Night.
Know this part of the world at all? No. I've never been here before.
Like some tea, wouldn't you? Do you take milk and sugar? Milk and sugar, Mr. Craig. Milk and sugar, Mr. Craig.
Still there. So it isn't a dream this time?
I beg your pardon?
Yes, it isn't a dream this time. I must be going out of my mind. You see, everybody in this room is part of my dream. Everybody.
Gosh.
Good Lord, really?
Very extraordinary.
You're kidding.
What, all of us?
I can only tell you that when I came into this room, I recognized you all, instantly.
Having seen all our photographs in the newspapers, I take it, Dr. Van Stocken.
Of course, you may have seen me on the sports page. Motor racing's my line.
Okay. Well, Tim, to add some definitiveness to the mystery surrounding what you thought of this film, how about we rate it next, like we like to do? Shall I or shall you go first?
Why don't you go first, Ryan?
All right. Well, per our rating system, what would I tell myself to do regarding this film? Avoid it, stream it, rent it, or buy it. I'd say rent it. And it reached certain levels where I could imagine being excited down the line to buy it, but it's not quite there for me right now. It is hands down my favorite wraparound story I've ever seen for a horror anthology film. I like that it didn't have we'll get into some thoughts I had maybe on length I'm not so sure about as far as the individual stories, but it was nice that it didn't seem like the more typical just 3 long ones that kind of just feel like they go on. That's kind of common for a lot of anthologies. And it does for me, and this is I think why I'm on the higher end for it. I've probably said this before in just talking about what's important for movies for me, but it feels like a kind of new revelation for me of sorts. I'm just trying to like put in terms, we can talk about what is important for me about what is necessary for a film to be a good film. How do I parse what makes a good film or not? And it's if it has gravitas, meaning like weight, depth, and amount of emotion, or weight and depth of emotion. And the last two, or the end story that this film is famous for, the ventriloquist dummy story, and just what the wraparound ended up being, and that final conclusion with the wraparound, like it did that stuff in the finale that was like right up there with Carnival or Souls or something like that, of just getting at this deeply affecting, reality bending horror that I just love in general, but especially when it's used so well. I couldn't think of a better, I'm just going to go on now. So you get it. I like it. We'll go on with more of what I liked about it in our next big section. So how about you, Tim?
I'd agree with all of that. I'd say I'm a rent too. I think that, you got to be in the mood for this style. Well, I need to be in the mood for this style. And I guess just unfortunately I was really tired. So it's just coincidental or circumstantial that I was sort of like, I was like intellectually, yeah, this is good. Emotionally, I was like, God, I'm really tired. So those things don't usually go together. So
we can always reschedule, Tim. I'd rather have you, if you're ever tired, don't feel like you have to watch it,
I wanted to watch it. I just found myself being like, damn, I'm super tired today. I went on a really long hike. So it's just one of those things. Next time I'll plan the hike around when I watch. But yeah, I kind of just would parrot exactly what you said about all of it. There's nothing else that I would that I felt differently than how you described it. So there you go.
All right. Rent it. Ding, 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 ding. Cool. All right. Well, then, as tired as you were, should you care to engage with the summary for this film for us and tell us what happened?
Sure. Okay. So our wraparound story, we begin with our wraparound, which is Mr. Crane. Or no, Craig, not Crane. He's shown up to like an estate out in the countryside. And when he gets there, there's like 6 or so people there, and he kind of has like a brain malfunction. And they're like, man, what's wrong with you? And he's like, well, this is exactly a dream I've had. So he's having like this sort of dream deja vu thing that we all feel, which is always a cool experience. I had it the other day. It was fun. And he describes that in his dream, he can kind of say like, it's not really super specific, but I've met you and that this was sort of going on, and I've met you, and they're all like, well, we all exist in the world. Maybe you've seen us somewhere. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure this is exactly my dream. And there's a doctor there who is sort of, they're playing off of, who's the skeptic of the group. But then they all, the way we get into the actual anthology stories is each person sort of describes a strange event or story that they're somehow connected to. And they all kind of live in sort of a supernatural or what's another word for, I guess they're all kind of supernatural. They all kind of revolve around death and like folk tale style kind of stories. And how many do we have? 6 total?
We have the hearse driver, the Christmas
5.
party, the haunted mirror, the golfer's story, and the ventriloquist dummy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So it's 5 plus. Okay, so plus the wraparound. So we get to the sort of the end, and throughout things that Mr. Craig has said will happen, or he kind of has predicted based on his dream. Every time we come back between stories, like one of those things kind of occurs. And then we get to the end, and he effectively wakes up from said dream. And we go, oh, how lame. It was all just a dream. But then the real twisteroo is that he receives the phone call from the guy at the estate in the countryside saying, can you come visit? He's like, man, this feels really familiar. And the credits roll as he drives up to the estate once again, which is the opening shot of the film.
And it's a perfect setup. We get immediately what's all going on, because he says at the beginning of the movie, one aspect about the dream that when he's sharing everyone with it is that he always forgets it immediately upon waking.
Yeah.
So
dream stuff is cool.
Exactly. And tied with horror stuff can be some of the best stuff, I think.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. We did it. Check with that. That means we can move on to our first big section here. I think we're ready. Let's do it. What worked?
What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked for you?
All right. Well, I already said it up front. This wraparound, Tim, it was great. Like, what we just said coming off of it, how it has in its, not only is it about story-wise on face value, about a guy trapped in a dream, a nightmare, and reliving it, ad nauseum or infinity in an infinite loop or whatever, horrific in itself that we get at the end. But there are just touches throughout that play off of that idea, and the filmmaking sense too, I thought was so incredible. Whether it was how the lighting just kind of changes as it goes on, gets a little weirder. Just the way he sort of acting wise in his performance, the way how he plays like he's been there before. I thought it was fun how all the other players in the house, they aren't all skeptical towards him. It's really just the one guy. So I don't know, it makes it feel all that much more just sort of like we're questioning it. It's not the case of just like he's the one crazy one in the group and everyone's doubting him, but it sort of allows us to be questioning along with him. Is this a dream or not? And following all that really well. Yeah, I thought it was super smart in that regard, and stylistically reflective in the film itself.
Yeah, I feel like this construct of the wraparound, it's not like in other ones it's so different. Asylum seems kind of maybe the closest in that, like, you've got a guy arriving at a place and then is presented with this, like, everybody here has a different story, right?
Or I guess like horror stories too.
Yeah,
was a little vague. If one happened to her. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that movie. But yes, kind of a common thing in horror anthologies.
But for some reason, I think because of the era and the style, I just felt like a solid anchor. Like, I felt grounded in that thing, and like interested kind of more in what these stories were individually with these other people. Like, I was curious about those other people and, like, how they were involved or whatever, even though like the golf one is probably the most removed, where it's like a guy kind of just telling a story about other guys. But even so, it all felt really cohesive, I guess. And then especially having the kind of finale, I guess, of Mr. Craig in the dream, like having it really turn into this crazy nightmare where all of those stories are melding together and he's trying to escape this nightmare. It's just awesome. That's
something that's really hard to do in horror anthologies. Then because of that, I don't think you really see is how how do you tie together all the little stories into as part of the conclusion? How do you take elements from them all? So to literally do that, we have this dream reality we've set up. And it was so great because it was like for, whether it's him seeing the bus driver or the hearse driver or whatever you call it, say we have room for one more, or the hide and seek kids and the ghost kid. It was like they had all stepped up another level of sinister once they had reached this level, accosting him at the end. I was really incredible and smart. Yeah.
Well, and just, I think this is something that I'm always excited about, is that when you can depict the actual kind of feeling of a dream or a nightmare, like that's an accomplishment. I don't think it's an easy thing to do. And you have to kind of tap into this strangeness that exists within dreams. It's like weird, everything is connected, but everything else is also just complete random chaos.
Yeah.
So having that feel and having the terror of that, just, it seemed like it was just the right like note or frequency. I was like, yeah, I've had that dream or that feeling in a dream.
They pushed it exactly as far as they could, I think, where you had these great shots, once it was really escalated and heating up at the end and he was having all the visions from the dream, where you had those like the classic kind of, maybe this is what made me think Carnival of Souls. Well, lots of overlap with that, but all of these now dream story entities kind of coming at camera, hands outstretched, lifting him up in the over the head shot, and then just ending with this. This is the shot I thought was going to go out on. At first, I'm like, oh, they should have made it go out there before the actual twist came. But it's like he's in a doorway that's kind of then in a Twilight Zone way, descending or going off into darkness. Oh, it was just like so good. That's what I mean. As far as reaching a kind of pinnacle, taking it as far as you can take it to get at that dream feel, but not feeling like it's just too stylized. But then just talking about it just kind of reminded me, like how you were saying, getting at that dream feel. I was just trying to think of more examples of how that's throughout, including at the setup. Like his whole arrival feels like a dream. In that sense, where you kind of show up a location and it feels like, oh, I'm supposed to be here, but then you aren't really sure why you're there. Like in the film sense, we only have a sort of vague reasoning that he's an architect and this is a place he has to do some kind of work at. But as soon as he gets there, that just kind of goes out the window. And it's just like we meet this group of people casually as if they're all just supposed to be there. It felt strange from the get-go in that way, but just in a way where it could be real. You couldn't really put your finger on it.
Yeah, they did a smart thing in that he shows up very kind of casual, I'm supposed to be here, and the actor plays this or is directed to play this just slight hesitancy of like looking around. He's like, business as usual with a little like thing in the back of his head. And that's such a cool feeling that it gives us, because we immediately like clue into that and go, oh, what's going on? And then they double down on, like, when he walks in the door, we've already sort of established that he's there on business. And the second he walks into a room and there's a bunch of people, he like freezes. And we go, oh, something's like off, something's bad, something's not the way it's supposed to be, just by him having this like hesitance or freeze moment. We go, this is not how things are supposed to go. So it's just a really simple and like effective device, because we've already been kind of, I guess, primed by the hesitancy at the onset, so that when he walks into the room and has that moment of what the hell's going on, we are completely on board with, oh, now the story has begun. We need to know what's weird. Why is it different? What is the deal? And so just like forcing those questions by the simplest act of a little hesitation when he's like getting out of the car and a little sideways glance over his shoulder when he's meeting the guy who owns the house or whatever, Foley. They're so minute and simple. But right away we go, uh-oh. And I just think it's so effective and simple that like I'm like, damn, we should be doing that all the time. Like well, in any horror film, you just the sideways glance or like the look over your shoulder without explanation is crazy effective.
Well, what it also gets at and can only do in this story, it's really interesting, is that his experience is kind of what it feels like to be in a dream, where as far as amount of lucidity, like I know there are people who maybe they do often actually have like full-on lucid dreams. It's something I've always been interested in and trying to like, you can kind of practice it or try to get better at it. But as that level that my dreams typically go at, I can have that like bit of lucidity where it's like this place is like if it's a place that I've dreamed of before and it's kind of like a recurring locale over the years for me in my dream worlds. I know like, oh, I've been here before. And then I can't say to myself, I can't get as far as saying to myself, I've been here before in a dream, but I can say like this, I've been here before in a blah, 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 something familiar that happens in a different state of mind. You know, like I don't know what a dream is in that state because I'm in a dream. And if I went any further, then I could activate lucidity or whatever the terminology would be. So just, I don't know. It just puts me right into that world. It's just cool how it's just working on that level too. His performance and level of observation and lucidity.
Yeah, I love it in dreams. It's funny to me to think about this because, like, I don't know that inside the dream I'm having these thoughts, but certainly when I'm trying to remember the dream afterwards, I'm like, oh, that was weird. That was off. Like, for example, a lot of time, kind of what you're describing, it's like you'll be in a room that is a room that you are familiar with, and your brain in the dream knows that it's, let's just say, your apartment. But the apartment will possess things in the dream that are completely abstract or like random and make no sense once you've woken up and thought about it. But during the dream, you're just accepting it, right? Like there's a wall missing and it's entering into an auditorium and you're like, you don't think twice about it in the dream a lot of the time, or at least I don't. You just sort of accept it for what it is. But when you like wake up, you go, whoa, what was that all about?
I do keep a dream diary a lot. Nice. And when I look back at it, so many of my things are like describing a location as it was like a water park meets a government official building, meets a Airbnb in a forest. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's sure. What it was like walking around there.
I love that stuff. It's so cool. And I guess what I'm getting at with this film is that in a way, they're kind of mixing those two things. Like he, in the moment inside of the dream, or at least I guess that's what we are led to believe eventually, he does have a moment of like, oh, this isn't a dream. I'm just going to accept it as my reality. But that's kind of what I'm saying is that when we are dreaming, at least for me, that's often the case. I don't even have the moment of like questioning in the dream. I just am accepting it. And like, that's such a cool, weird, just component, I guess, of dreams. And to kind of get it with this, in a way, I think it helps with the anthology style because it leads us into the stories in a way that we just accept it. Mm-hmm. We're like, oh yeah, that's sure. Now we're in this person's story.
Well, let's get into some of these stories.
All right.
The hearse driver, the first one. I thought it set the stage in a great way. Just as a film overall, and not even just in the the story itself, but being so short, it just felt so refreshing in a horror anthology just to have a first one that just kind of was like, okay, again, I don't know why it's a complaint of mine, but I mean, I guess it's kind of cool if they're good or whatever, but just to like have this 20 to 30 minute, I don't know, it's never, length story. It's just never really been my favorite in horror anthologies. So it started off great, just classic Twilight Zone kind of feel and style.
Totally.
Like it reached a level of, and I'll just use this word since I set it up at the beginning, where it reached that gravitas for me that I want when it's a movie's fully doing something, was when things get quiet and he looks towards the curtain. And the way, like, just something about that silence and the combination of looking at the curtain, and I think we might have been dollying into it a bit. It just all of a sudden, I just felt this like sense of dread and like what is behind the curtain, almost in that like hobo behind the alley in Mulholland Drive, like the setup of just that kind of suspense of knowing something wrong is behind it. So then to have the reveal of this, it's not a hearse, even though it's called the hearse driver. Maybe it is an old-fashioned looking hearse. It looks more like a little bus or buggy or something.
Well, the first thing is a hearse. It's an old school hearse, like horse and carriage style.
But with that setup and creepy context of the curtain and looking through it, it was just like the context just made it so when we see it, it was like we know what this is immediately. Like it just felt like it's death here to take him out, if it was just him opening it casually, it looked like it could be normal or casual enough. There wouldn't be anything sinister about it. So I just thought it was one of those incredible examples of where, because of this context, just immediately had this weight to it of just, ooh, this is scary. Don't want it. This is bad news, buddy.
I love the way that they kind of mess with, right off the bat, they mess with our sense of time too. And they do it, it's not so abrupt that we like right away are, thrown off. It because they've set up that he's a little delirious anyway. So like when he gets up and he goes to the window and opens it and it's daytime suddenly, like she just shut that curtain. And it was nighttime, right? And then he opens it as daytime. It's like, oh, well, did he fall asleep and wake back up? Like, it makes us question everything.
This is a race car driver who is waking up in the hospital room, we should say, if anyone hasn't seen this, even though we hope you have and you're joining us that way.
Yeah, so this race car driver is in a bad accident during a race and he wakes up in a hospital and then he like kind of falls in love with his nurse, which, I get that.
Which, I'll save that for things of note. Anyway, sorry, you're saying. So,
yeah, just the sense of time and like the weird like compression of that is a thing that happens in dreams as well, which I love right away. I'm like, even though at this moment we don't really know that the whole movie is in that context, again, they're just setting up these sort of commonalities in dreams, the feeling of being in a dream without pointing it out. It just is what the movie is, which is just, it's great. There are examples of this in every single story throughout where you're like, oh, that's a dream thing.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite examples of that was in the next story, The Christmas Party, which was, we have, I guess, like teenagers with some kids who they play, at a Christmas party, they decide to play hide and seek. So after sort of getting led off to a far corner of the house by like this dude trying to make moves on her, she then leaves him and goes even further and meets a little boy and interacts with him. And then the end, when she rejoins the party, realizes, oh shit, that wasn't a real boy. It was a ghost boy who was killed here because it was right. The story that I was being told that it's haunted ended up being true. Little boy was murdered here. But as far as, what you were saying, just connecting to that dreamlike location and feel and logic and all that, this film was incredible. This short is really incredible for me in a sort of capturing a certain feeling that I'd never seen captured in a movie before, but that's really specific. It's adjacent to that idea of liminal spaces, I know that you are interested in. It actually got at it a bit. I just finished reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. But it's that kind of feel you get. And when you're a kid, you can maybe tap into this a bit more when places by default just seem bigger. But it feels like when, let's say, you've left the party at a house to like go to the bathroom, and then after that leaving, you like then take another hall to an even further room where you just have this sense of loneliness and disconnection. Yet there's also this feeling of like ghosts in maybe a non-literal sense are just kind of there with you. Like you almost don't feel alone, but it's not as far as like, oh, I am someone's in this room with me, like a ghost feel. It's you just have a certain presence. It's more than, maybe that is the liminal space feeling, but it doesn't feel quite that, because it maybe that is that feeling of you're just passing through something that, but the space itself feels like, oh, it's a sitting room, let's say, but I'm just passing through it. I'm not actually going to be sitting in it. So it's a treating a non-liminal space liminally. Maybe that's the feel for a bit. But another way to put it, hopefully I captured it by setting the scene, is just like you're kind of just really separating from the warmth of the other people you're with and kind of finding this lonely corner of a house. So then to insert that idea, or what plays up that idea, is to meet a full-bodied ghost boy, which I was already just kind of wrapped up in that spell of the feel when we met him, that I wasn't even doing like what I should be doing on a horror movie and being like, oh, is he a ghost? What is he? What's up here? It was just, I had this feeling of like, yeah, something's wrong, but it's okay. We're just kind of meeting him now, and all right, and this. So it did kind of hit me at the end of that horror. Oh yeah, it wasn't like a twist, but it kind of hit me in a way like, oh, I just went off and met this ghost boy. Ooh. Anyway, all that, it was really incredible. This kind of unseemingly so in this story.
Yeah, I think I agree very much. Like the way I took it, the thing that I really like is to your point, when we are alone in spaces that continue on, like a space and then another space behind that space and then another space behind that space, we're getting further and further away from like our touchstone to reality, which is like the group. And like I can think of experiences like that in life, like when you're in your middle school after everybody is left and you're like going down the hall, there's just that feeling of like almost endlessness because there's nobody around. And then to get to the end of it and there's a kid in a totally like livable room at the back of all of these like rooms upon rooms. I mean, they're in the attic at one point. How did she get from the attic into a hallway, into a stairwell, into a back room? Like, what is going on? Like, what is this space? It's so cool. So like the eeriness that comes along with that kind of thing is just so effective.
Yeah, I was going to say another example for anyone who knows this example of this feeling I'm trying to describe. It's like when you're 3 doors getting into the heart of the castle in Super Mario 64. It's
yes,
this eerie feeling sets in.
Yep. No, it's very cool. Just to backtrack for a second, just to make a point of a thing that worked. That bus stunt in the hearse driver one, whatever that is, I guess it's probably a model. I think it's a model.
They look like obvious models to me, yeah.
Yeah. It's so badass for 1945. I was like, damn, look at this intense bus crash into like over a cliff. Awesome.
Yeah, that was cool. So 2 good ones to start us off, and then we get into The Haunted Mirror, which started to go a little longer than the first 2, but I was still into this. This one had a lot of neat stuff going for it. Just the whole conceit of the idea is basically the setup. Again, if you didn't watch it, but we hope you did, is looking. The couple gets a mirror where it turns out a husband murdered a wife while looking in the mirror, I guess, or I forget how it's set up exactly.
So the
Something like
setup
that.
is that this, there's this, I think they're newlyweds or whatever. There's a married couple, and the wife buys her husband an antique mirror, and the husband starts to see a totally different room and himself in this totally different room with a 4-post bed and a fireplace, and it's sort of an older style. They're in a pretty modern room themselves, but then he's seeing this older room through the mirror. And he starts to kind of get obsessed with it and like just stay home and stare at it. So she gets freaked out. She goes back to the antique dealer and says, hey, like, where'd you get that mirror? I noticed that there's this 4-post bed that looks sort of the similar style. Is that from the same room? And he goes, oh yeah, it was all from the same room, same person, same house. And the story of that person and why we have all of this stuff is that this guy went crazy because he was I forget, paralyzed or something like that. So he's stuck in his room where the mirror was, his bedroom, and his wife was going out without him, obviously living her life, but he becomes suspicious that she's cheating on him, and it drives him crazy, and he ends up strangling her to death and then slitting his own throat. And so all of that bad juju is trapped in the mirror, and the wife realizes this and goes back and has to try and snap her husband out of this because he's becoming or beginning to behave in that same trance-like way. And he ends up essentially becoming or like acting out the same thing, where he thinks that she's cheating on him with somebody else, and he tries to kill her, and then she breaks the mirror. I was yelling like, just break the mirror. And then she did.
All right.
Breaks the spell.
Full on summary. You were not too tired, it seems like. You're able to follow that well. So just that conceit, the idea of seeing another room in the mirror, and one that's has this like exotic or glamorous or fancy allure to it. It's another really specific kind of horror from that. I don't know if it was kind of quite like, it's somewhere between like in 2001 A Space Odyssey of, you have that room at the ending that it's not a real thing, that it's, set up for you somehow by unseen forces or entities. But it's like you still feel the allure of like, it's nice in itself though. Or it's like a siren in, kind of furniture form almost, of just like roaring fireplace, 4-post intricate design bed. I don't know. So there's always that kind of interesting horror for like, where it's a place or a thing you want or should be comforting, but something's off about it. So it's really interesting and simple enough that it's not like flashy or anything. It really worked.
I think that this construct of the horror surrounding a trance or anything that is hypnotizing is really, really cool. To me, it's like, it's so scary because I think, oh God, that would be horrible. Like, what if you're the person being entranced and you can't break out of that? Like the implicit lack of control within that is really frightening. I mean, I think it's why I think cults are scary, because they've hypnotized you in a way. It's, or you're becoming indoctrinated into this thing and you kind of don't even realize it. Like any time somebody is manipulating your brain into like forgetting who you are or your touchstones to like reality is really scary. And then like to be the person outside of that, seeing somebody else be the victim of that, is also really scary, because it's like, oh no, how do I break this person out of that? Like, are they too far gone? Are they just like, are they lost forever? Like, that's a really scary, concept. So I love that there's a physical object that you can break that spell by breaking. Like, that's just fun and cool.
Yeah. Being driven to kill his wife, kind of like the Overlook, to make another Kubrick reference here. My other favorite aspect of that one, the Haunted Mirror, was just the dude's monologue of describing the evil that he's being allured to. It was the kind of thing where it felt like it was best. I don't know if it only works this way, but it is definitely best delivered by a British man in the 1940s. You know what I mean? Just
Sure.
like the style that inherently comes from all of that. It was just perfect, and he killed it. Just went for it. It was the kind of thing that, you know, maybe it's harder to pull off nowadays or being too on the nose. But when he's, you know, just saying things like they're just so clear and as a force of evil, and putting it in those terms. But when he does it as well as he did it, and with that style, British man in the 1940s, I just ate it up. I loved it.
Yeah, it was cool.
And then if nothing else for that, we have the golfer's story next.
The golfer's story, written or based on an H.G. Wells short story.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah. We'll
Which
get to
is
that.
weird.
So
Cool, strange side note.
it's one that's kind of a different tone from the others. All of a sudden we have a bit more of a lighthearted one, even though it's kind of story and themes in a couple moments are dark in a certain way. It's almost like, you know, when you're watching the Twilight Zone movie and the Spielberg kick the can segment comes on and you're like, whoa, this is weird and different and doesn't fit the rest. It's kind of like that. But then what it did allow is kind of almost a breather in a way to then get into the horror for the last one. But I'll admit this one was probably the one, just maybe because I didn't see it coming, that tone change, that I just kind of tuned out a bit. It was longer and more talky than the others.
It was goofy. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say in a bad way, but I agree. It was just a different tone, had sort of a lightheartedness to it, even though the dude literally just like kills himself, walks into a river, which is really dark. So it's like, but like the way he does it and how his hat sort of floats to the top when he submerges, like just little details like that made it still feel kind of irreverent and funny.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, that was a moment that I mentioned.
Golf ball in it, for God's sake.
No, that was definitely the moment when I meant when I said there was something more eerie, was him killing himself that way. But just the overall story was cool of their I don't know, into weird like male competition stuff over a woman and putting it into a game, and then being like haunted by that friend, but they're your friend, so it's like it's not quite a haunting. I don't know. There's interesting ideas in it, and it's the one that I'll be interested to see again someday.
Yeah. I felt like there was a number of eye roll moments, I guess, if you will, or just like side glances to Britt on the couch where she is like half watching and like she would hear some sort of overt sexist thing, and it kind of like I could feel her like side glancing to me, and I'd be like, yeah, I heard it too. This is antiquated language.
Yeah, and comedy, all that. I don't
Right.
know. Well, if we don't have a lot good to say about that one, then we can move to the big star of the show, the one that's most famous for, it felt like rightly so, the big finisher, the ventriloquist's dummy. This one, I do think, deserves the acclaim and praise. I thought it was incredible.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, specifically, what I just was so taken with was the Michael Redgrave, main dude's performance. And it feels like for the evil dummy things, maybe I just am thinking of like Slappy and Goosebump. So of course that's going to be more overt, where, you know, you always have the moment if it's like is the dummy real or is it not thing, where it just feels so clearly like the dummy's going out of control and it must be its own consciousness or whatever. You know, it must be a real evil dummy. His performance, it just felt like it was on that exact creepy, eerie level of at any given time, it just felt like it could go either way, but there was definitely something wrong about it. Just, it was never too much or too little in the amount of that the dummy was sort of taking on its own personality in a way that's made the whole thing really effective.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of dummy horror.
Oh, of dummy horror. Okay.
And what I mean by that is I find it extremely creepy.
Oh, okay. So it's effective.
Like,
you do like it.
I do like it, but I find it to be extremely creepy. It's like dolls, I don't like dolls either. So it is good horror. I love this. Just, there's a thing that they do that is so cool in the first, 5 minutes of it when he's sort of performing his ventriloquism act. You can see that he's keeping his mouth just a little bit open as a ventriloquist would, right? Because he's making the voice. And you can kind of occasionally see his like tongue or his sort of like teeth, I guess, moving. I mean, this is the human I'm talking about, providing the voice. So like they sell that, and then there comes this point when he just has his mouth closed, and the dummy, whose name I forget,
or just open slightly, where he's not doing it quite as much.
Where it's like now it's just we're moving toward it legitimately not being him making that voice. And I love that detail.
There was that one point where the overlap between, it was the dummy or him kind of more making a sound or muttering or laughing or something. But it's basically like, with the ventriloquist, you never see them making a noise at the same time.
Right.
But it was they had this moment where it was like handing off. It was just so close who was making a noise at any given time that you kept going almost like a Ouija board. Wait, were you moving it? Wait, it was like, wait, did he just, was that just him, or was that, wait, what? It was that overlap was there. It was incredible.
Yeah, I think all of that was very, very purposefully done and like constructed to make us feel more and more and more uncomfortable. It just sells it so much. The design of the puppet, I'll pay it respect and not call it a dummy. The design of the dummy, the puppet.
It's called the ventriloquist dummy.
I know.
Who you calling dummy?
Like it's just creepy enough. They always are, so it's not like outside of the norm, but I don't know. It is creepy. The mouth, man, that mouth is freaky. It
and you
really
can call
bothers me.
Hugo is.
Oh, right. Hugo.
Right. They added some kind of like skin flaps or something.
Yes.
On the mouth.
Oh my God. I just, and the other ventriloquist is so good. He's like, I don't know. There's something about, I actually wondered if he wasn't some famous ventriloquist of the era or something, because he felt so real, like a real person. But that whole sequence of him being invited back to the dressing room, and the first moment of him hearing the Hugo's voice and being like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Thinking that this is all still part of the act. Like, I just love that whole thing where he has to, he's us, right? He's sort of, we're watching this unfold through him in a way. And the breakdown of Maxwell, the operator of Hugo, from the point of the actual performance falling apart to the dressing room, and seeing how this is affecting him and not really knowing yet like what's going on. The performance of that and the despair that the actor Michael Redgrave has in that dressing room scene is so effective.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, he's trapped. He's really panicked. And he like doesn't have an out. And like that in and of itself is super scary to me.
Yeah. I was just thinking if in this kind of story we have the almost the audience surrogates of characters who at any given point we're wondering or we're witnessing how much are they believing the possibility of this dummy maybe having some kind of life of its own, right? Spirit of its own. So to have that have its own arc that ends with they are somehow wrapped up in the reality of this dummy's character or personhood or whatever, that at the end when he's getting strangled and quote unquote killed, they like rush in like they have to save him. It's like it could be, I don't know, like I don't know. At one hand, it just feels a little hokey and like, come on, really? But you're caught up with it, and it like works in the context of the movie, and just says and does something really interesting that I think it does work in the end.
I think why it works partially is that if you completely eliminated the conceit, I guess, that Hugo and Maxwell are two separate entities, and just look at it from the perspective of this is somebody who is losing their mind, it's still incredibly scary. Because, like, yeah, I mean, let's just say that Hugo is just an extension of him spiraling into insanity. Like, there is no Hugo. There is in his mind, but like there isn't actually. And like that's so scary to me that he's like having that battle in his head. If that's how you want to take it.
Well, it is, and I think it's a scary thing. I mean, you could really look at it from a lot of angles, but there's always that idea that characters in movies or characters in books, when we're reading them, they're essentially real people to us, so just the idea of being a person who's maybe a bit more timid or less forthright to be responsible and connected to the personality of an outgoing dummy, the idea that is on you and in you to be the conduit of, just that idea of like it in itself is such a strong thing. It's forcing me out. It's almost like looking at it from a possession angle. There's something about it. I don't know. It's when putting in the terms you're putting it makes me look at it that way.
Well, it's also I just think it's really cool to look at from this sort of multifaceted psychological, like what is, like which psychology theory could you ascribe to this? Like we all have kind of positive and negative components to how we view ourselves and how we view our identity. And I love stories that kind of point at this idea, or this, I guess, I don't know if it's a theory so much, but just the idea that we all view even our worst tendencies as a part of our identity. And a lot of the time, if you were to eliminate those negative tendencies, you would effectively kill your sense of your own identity. And I think we're often really scared of that. It's like what keeps us in these bad habits or bad patterns a lot of the time is that we've formed this identity around those things a lot of the time. And like this, you could look at this story through that lens of like, he's nothing without Hugo.
I think something you said in there is why I think all that is ripe for horror, is because our default approach to those sides of ourselves or our Hugos is to smash it, kill it, right?
That's
but you
right.
Can't do that to an aspect of yourself.
That's right.
In fact, to try to kill it or cut it off as we learn in other horror movie monsters, only makes it stronger. So it's that old quote, friend of the devil is a friend of mine. That's the only really approach in the end we have.
I love confronting that notion because it is a really hard thing to look at, I think, just from a basic human level, and a hard thing to kind of parse out, like, who am I? Who am I in relation to other people? Who am I in relation to myself? Like, my good qualities, my bad qualities, all of that is making up your identity. And you don't really get to like slice it up and throw certain parts of that away. I mean, you can try to, I guess, improve upon those things, but I love how, like, the terror that gets wrapped up in looking at those things, because it is inherently scary. Like, oh man, you can't kill off this part of yourself or else you will be killed. It is a part of you.
It's why when we see the smashed dummy there's a part of us that is a little sad in a way. Well, all that is a great angle to look at Evil Ventriloquist Dummy, short film at. But then there's just the satisfaction, the visceralness of like that Chucky gets at, of seeing a dummy run at us and do its thing, all out as a killer dummy. So now what was so brilliant in this film is that, okay, well, to do that in the little short would have totally made it something it shouldn't have been and ruined it if, like, somehow in the ventriloquist dummy it actually became able-bodied and was running all around. That would really kill the tone and story that was aiming at. But thanks to this brilliant wraparound conception of having all these aspects appear in his nightmare he's having, we do still get the satisfaction in this film of having the evil dummy Hugo appear and run at him and strangle him and climb up on the chair or the bed or whatever he's on. So it's just really got to have our cake and eat our too,
Some little kid with a Hugo mask, like, getting up and crawling onto a bed. I was like, oh!
Right. Anyway, so that made it fun to tie it all together, which we've already...
Yeah, I mean, I think all in all, this is a really... Look, I think at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway for me is that this was in 1945. Like, all of my complaints about it are only in relation to, like, things they were inhibited by technologically, and I guess a little bit in the just sort of the tonality of the era.
Yeah. But
so
pretty incredible that one of the earliest horror anthologies is one of the better ones, I think.
Right. And to think that this is 15, 14 years before the Twilight Zone.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I feel like you could put any one of these stories up against a Twilight Zone episode and be like, yep, those are about on par.
Yeah. Including the portmanteau or wraparound.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Very much so. I mean, it just makes me wonder how influential this movie was in that era. Like, what was it considered like one of the great, I don't know, horror films of the time?
Well, save that thought for our last section. Things we know. Save that question. But for now, let's get it out of the way. It sounds like we're done with what did work. So let's see if anything did not work.
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
Well, I guess just to follow up on what I was saying more specifically, like, there's some stiltedness, I guess, that I just would say is a product of the time. I can't really say that it didn't work overall, but it just sort of is like, I don't know, like, kind of makes you go, all right, let's move forward here.
What were you talking about?
Well, like the sort of the language around, like, the sexist language and stuff, and like just this construct of a couple of those things or how people talk to each other just didn't. I was just like, ugh, yeah, that stuff that existed. But you can't really blame it. Like you can't blame the movie for that. It's of its time. It's just a thing that I'd kind of go, oh God. There's some pretty bad voiceover matching. That's just a technological like whatever problem that they had to solve. It's like, am I really criticizing the movie for that? No, but did it distract me at times? Yes. And like you had said, I think a couple of them drag on a little too much. Like we could have wrapped it up just a touch faster than we did. But beyond that, like I just don't really have any other, like there's no specific thing where I'm like, gosh, this really doesn't work.
Yeah, it was weird. My things were just kind of on that things that, yeah, I wonder if on a second viewing wouldn't bother me as much, were just having them kind of increase in length as they go kind of threw me off after kind of getting used to these nice sort of like setup chunk of the movie, fun little story ending, boom, boom, boom.
I just think the whole movie, it's 103 minutes long, and it could have easily been 93 minutes and it would have been like perfect.
Mm-hmm. Well, they did do for the US cut, they did I think they cut out maybe 2 of the stories.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
They definitely cut out the golf one. But I think they cut out the Christmas party too. I remember them saying.
Oh man.
Well, that is kind of a thing of note. Are we already can we already jump to that, or
why not?
All right. Then here we go. Things of note.
This should be interesting.
I'd like to just say that it's noteworthy that there's a difference after a day of like going to sleep, waking up, and talking about this from my like initial reaction last night when I finished watching. I was just sort of like, okay, that was a movie. But now looking back on it, and like having that night's rest to like, I guess, refresh my brain, it is pretty, I'm on a different tune.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is kind of like the one I'll keep referring to. This is one of my all-time favorites now, Carnival of Souls, where I remember the first time I watched that, it was just like, I don't know, like maybe I had almost dreamed it or something. I don't know. This film, like that film, it like some of the best horror movies, it just kind of haunts you afterwards. Like I remember my good friend who might be listening showing his favorite horror movie, The Exorcist, to his wife for the first time, who's not really one to watch horror movies, but she knew it was his favorite. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's watch it. And he said, and, she was maybe kind of playing down, okay, probably built it up in her head or whatever. But then he said that she said after the fact, kind of like, it's kind of sticking with me, it's kind of, there's something about these effective horror movies. They catch up with you. There was a feeling that was there that if you're just kind of paying attention to the outwardness of it all, you may overlook on a sort of first intellectual discernment of what you thought of it.
Yeah.
Anyways, but well, you were asking, there's its influence on you thus far, but you're asking its influence with other filmmakers and such.
Right. Like, was it considered at the time a big deal?
It did well at the box office, but as far as its legacy, Martin Scorsese placed it 5th on his list of 11 scariest horror films of all time.
Okay.
So,
all right, that's cool.
That's saying something. And then
now I want to know what are the
right.
the other 10.
But the one that I just realized as far as influence, and this is the kind of thing, whether it's conscious or not, who knows, doesn't really matter. But John Landis, who went on to make God, what was it called? Amazon Women on the Moon, not a horror anthology, but anthology film. But American Werewolf in London, like you mentioned, that aspect of falling in love with a nurse and having your ghost friend visit you.
Yeah.
Like two different stories in this movie. And he's in the special features talking about this movie. So he's clearly is a fan. So it has its influence. And then someone else who was, I was trying to find his connection to it, but his name's Reese Shearsmith. He's a like British actor, filmmaker, writer. I know him originally from this weird TV show called The League of Gentlemen that's super dark. But the other actors and filmmakers on that TV show are the ones who made Ghost Stories, which we reviewed. So I was kind of looking for the connection with him, but it seems like there are English filmmakers who at least are able to make, and John Landis and Scorsese, who are able to make a conscious connection to its influence for them. But
cool.
It's funny seeing now and seeing without even having seen it. I feel like it's kind of on stuff I'm working on. I can, see connections and whatnot. It's like, this is some great stuff it's there. And whether we've seen it or not, it was all more evidence for how it was ahead of its time in a way, I think, and really well done.
I agree. I think, that's one of the big things to me is that it does feel about 15 years, maybe 20 years ahead of its time.
Yeah. And you were curious, well, is this the first horror anthology? What else are we looking at here? The first one I could track down, I could find Unheimliche Geschichten, or...
Wait, let me tell you what that means. What is it? Unheimliche Geschichten?
Yeah.
God, what would that mean? I really would like to go relearn German. Does it mean Heimlich? What does that mean? This all sounds very familiar. I don't remember.
It says literally translates to uncanny stories, but titled it in English Eerie Tales. Was a 1919 German silent anthology film.
Wow.
That it was split into 5 stories, like some of them spooky Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Louis Stevenson stories, ghost stories, things like that. And then the filmmaker later remade the film again in 1932 as The Living Dead was the title. So 1919 and 1932, same filmmaker made was, I guess, the earliest examples of horror anthologies. And then we had another German film called Waxworks, which was from 1924, obviously another silent one at the time. And it was like the wraparound is someone who accepts a job at a waxworks museum, I guess, and the different exhibits spur the telling of these different stories. And then the earliest one in the States was from 1943, so 2 years before Dead of Night, called Flesh and Fantasy.
Whoa.
And that one, it was like one of the stories, or it looks like a few of them had supernatural themes. It's tied together. The 3 segments was a conversation about the occult between 2 clubmen. So those are the ones before this one. Cool. 1935. Yeah, that was interesting. Been
Exciting.
Around pretty much for the whole... I mean, that first one, 1919, it's over 100 years old now.
Right?
Yeah. You mentioned how that one story was based on the H.G. Wells, the golf one. Mm-hmm. It was like it was in essence, they got the rights or whatever. That is pretty much, they only played that up and used it for the advertising. That was based on H.G. Wells, a story based on H.G. Wells. But apparently they took very, very little from the story and just it just had something to do with interacting with a ghost who is in limbo. And the aspect that they said that they took from it was where he does that weird little hits his body different ways as kind of like an exercise to try to get out of limbo. That was a device they took from the H.G. Wells story. So it's kind of funny. They just ended up then just using his name to help advertise it. The Christmas Story one was based on a really well-known murder at the time. Where it was a woman who killed her younger brother, just like, in the movie. But what was interesting, the behind the scenes, they pointed out how that killer who kind of, disappeared into obscurity or whatever, she died the same year the movie came out. So it was a weird kind of passing off. But like, I guess just a few months before the movie came out. So
wow.
I don't want to say like, oh, poor her, she never got to see it, but there's something just weird or interesting that she could have seen it but just missed it, or I don't know, that timing's interesting.
Yeah. Really
interesting. I didn't quite follow how this would have played out, but they said that the idea for that this is all in a loop ending wasn't originally written for it. It happened by accident when they were screening, as they were working on it, print of the films, the producers, and the projectionist messed up and had the last reel start playing after, or the first reel start playing after the last reel again. And then that just gave them the idea of like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense for our story here. If it's all in a dream, to keep continuing. So what I was saying was that original ending of like, could have worked. You can't, I don't know. It was almost like I did feel where it would come up saying the end, right at the end of the nightmare when he's going off into the darkness in that doorway. But apparently all by serendipity or accident, if you want to, whatever you want to call it.
I love stuff ending like that. I had that happen to a short film of mine where I had accidentally moved part of the edit to the back end of it, and it was just like a cut that was in the wrong place, and it played out and like kind of abruptly cut to nothing, and I was like, whoa. That's a way better ending than I had.
Cool.
I was like, I think I'm just going to keep that. Cool.
Well, on telling anecdotes, I was curious to follow up with you, Tim. Like, you don't have to you only delve in as much as you want to. But you said you had the other day an instance of feeling like you were a dream deja vu.
Oh,
as
yeah.
You put it. Can you just, I don't know, I'm curious.
Yeah, let me try to describe it. I feel like it's always a weird thing to try to describe. So I was at I have this baseball team that I play with, and we were short 2 players, and they basically called last second and were like, oh, we can't make it. So then we didn't have enough guys to play the game, and so we're standing there in this limbo of like, well, what do we do? Do we try to convince the other team to like play a few innings just for fun or whatever? And we were all just standing there in a very specific place on a particular field that we've only been on like one time before. And we were having a conversation about a totally different player from a different team. And I just was standing there and suddenly feeling like we have had this exact conversation, which I guess is possible. But the way it felt was it was 2 things. Sometimes when you have deja vu, at least for me, that the feeling is just familiarity. But this was both familiarity and felt like I had a dream that this instance had occurred. And when I said that I was having deja vu, everybody kind of was like, oh, that's cool, and like made some comment about it. And I was like, oh, this was in the dream too. Like me saying I was having deja vu. It was very strange. But really, I like those moments. I think they're always fun and weird. It doesn't make me feel bad. I just go, oh, freaky.
Cool. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. All these guys being interviewed on the special features pointed out, it's weird to think this is a thing of note of a mission almost, but I thought it was interesting that this film, even though it's released in 1945 and made that same time, obviously, there's no mention of the war.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd think World War II would be on all these characters, kinds of like you would feel it, you would know it, even if they're at the point where it was just ending. So that just all gives the feel of, that helps to all give the feel of it being dreamlike and sort of not being set in a specific time or place.
Totally. Yeah.
Like you want to be able to go, okay, does that make it so it's just before World War II started? Is this, 1939 earlier, or are we just supposed to hope the war's ended and this takes place right afterwards? Because by no mention of it, it was a pretty smart decision to do that in order to help keep it like a dream.
Yeah.
But
That's
that's what I think. Like, I mean, you think like, oh well, was that deliberate almost because it's not included? But it seems like it's so predominant that when you're writing something at the time, you have to imagine it crosses your mind whether you include that or not.
But I mean, having said that, right now I'm working on a script, and it has to take place pre-pandemic in order for it to work at all. And so it's just a conceit that I have to make. I'm like, okay, it's 2017.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Now, that is a question as creators, what we sort of, do they have, where you see them, people sort of starting to deal with it different ways now, where we get it. They didn't want to make like all of the Righteous Gemstones new season with them wearing masks, but I feel like there's this one reference where they reference the pandemic in like a little off the cuff way, kind of. It's sort of like there, or you miss it, or you just sort of set your movie in this is movie world, so it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, really interesting. We're all gonna deal with that. The last thing I had, just thought it was interesting. So this was before the term horror movie came to modern. I forgot how to say this word last episode too. Parlance. So 2 different terms that was used to describe this film. One was comedy melodrama. The LA Times described it as psychological thriller. So it's kind of all over the map, what it could be called before we had that term horror. I thought that was interesting.
That's cool. I just wanted to say, if anybody was wondering, just to pay it off, since we mentioned this Scorsese 11 scariest horror films, I'll just give a rundown of it. We've covered 6 of them on the show. So that's cool.
The Innocents was one of them.
Yes. So Psycho, we did. The Innocents, Night of the Demon, Dead of Night, obviously this one, The Entity, and The Uninvited are the 6 that we've covered. Now, the other 5, I would say only one of them is sort of quote-unquote obscure. The other 5 are The Haunting, which is kind of like obviously, The Changeling, The Shining, The Exorcist, right? Those 4 are, I think most people put those 4 on top whatever lists. But this one I've never heard of, and it's a Val Lewton film. It's called Isle of the Dead, and it's from 1945 as well. So I'm kind of curious. It looks like it might be kind of a like a double feature thing. I don't know. I'll have to dive in a little bit further just on first glance. But it's got Boris Karloff, so what more could you ask for?
Not a lot. You're right. Cool.
Val Lewton and Boris Karloff. It's like, yeah, sure.
I don't know if I've seen that one. I don't know. I'm looking at it. I don't think I have. Interesting. Cool.
Well, I think we should put it in the back pocket and maybe return to it at some point.
Sounds good. Yeah, then we'll have completed the list of not 10, but 11 of his favorite horror films. Had to get in Isle of the Dead, Scorsese, old Marty. All right. Cool. Well, Tim, if that's it for Dead of Night, we like to wind down with our recommendations.
Yes, our recommendations. Well, I mean, I'm going to be one of those guys, and, because this is who I am. The latest comic book movie has arrived, and it is goddamn glorious. It's one of the greatest 3-hour movies I've ever seen. And that's not saying much, but because there aren't that many 3-hour movies. But The Batman it's legit. I mean, it is ridiculously good. And I will go see it again in the theater, which is kind of like the highest praise I think I can give to a film.
Wow. I have not seen it yet. I will go see it per your recommendation.
All you Robert Pattinson haters need to go home and shut your butts, because it's so good. Stop with the hate.
Do people still do that? I feel like
yes. It's wild to me.
They're
got like, Robert Pattinson. So it's either this. They're like, he's too like goth, like whiny, or he's too good looking, or they just reference that he's a douchebag because he was in Twilight. It's like, dude, stop. He's done like 15 movies that are so good that nobody's seen.
Maybe it's just the circles I follow, Tim, but I'd like to think that has tipped the other direction now. We have like videos going around of people freaking out when he surprisingly, shows up at screenings. We've had him in The Lighthouse. We've had him work with Cronenberg. And people know that.
That's what I don't understand is how it still is a thing that I keep running into where I'm like, are you serious?
I would be willing to bet a lot of our listeners right now, the majority of them like him. If you don't,
good.
Let us know and let us know why. Because I really think what you're saying is applicable more 2013, and we've reached a new. You're still in those circles. I think Robert Pattinson liking him is in and hip and cool now.
That's right. You don't even have to like him. Just like this, like undue hatred that he gets is just so dumb. Like, I think get over it.
Also, Twilight is old enough now. I think people have gotten over it. So
yeah,
I wouldn't worry as much as you may be. I think we're in
I don't
good
worry so much as just I'm shocked every time I hear it, and I am hearing it.
All right.
I'm just like, oh God.
Well, stop listening
to those
the
movie.
People.
It's so good.
I was looking at what I watched. I really haven't been watching too much these days. I'm finally catching up now. I picked up some other movies at Videotheque. We rented Dead of Night. I'm going to finally watch Kids in the Hall, Brain Candy, and
nice.
The Sword and the Sorcerer I haven't seen.
Oh, wow.
So maybe I can recommend those next time. But for now, I don't know. Just in the spirit of we can recommend Dead anything, I feel like a lot of you are already good about this, but I will just recommend Dead going for a walk.
Oh, yeah. I did that 2 nights ago.
In the spirit of Tim's hike, too. But, it doesn't have to be a hike, just like Tim said, just a walk. But I feel like you're pretty good about that, so only if you needed a little incentive, there you go, from me to you.
On our night walk the other night, 2 nights ago, we were like in my neighborhood in the sort of not on a main street. And there was this moment where we looked over, we heard something, and it was a woman walking up an outside staircase to the second level of an apartment building. And like we were under a street lamp, and the light from the street lamp and the light from the doorway at the top of these steps that she was standing in, and she's wearing like a long black dress, was like so cinematic. I like very rushedly grabbed my phone and like took a picture, and it is such a cool, weird, freaky picture. So maybe I'll put it on our Instagram. People can decide if they think it looks cool.
Cool. That's a fun, creepy note to end on here.
Yeah.
So we'll be back in 2 weeks now, or every other week. In closing, whether you aren't sure you're just in a dream on repeat or not, thanks for listening.
And we will see you next time and time and time. Goodbye.
Bye.